The night my son texted that he was disowning me, the house felt colder than usual. The lamp beside me flickered, and for the first time in years, I felt truly alone. I stared at the words on my screen, trying to understand how a child I raised with my own hands could cut me off so easily. But as the shock settled, something inside me shifted. I straightened my back, wiped my tears, and realized this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. What happened next changed everything. Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from. I was sitting alone in my living room when my phone buzzed. I expected a simple message from my son, maybe something about visiting or asking if I needed groceries. Instead, the words on the screen sliced through me like a cold knife. My son had sent a short text, written with no hesitation and no kindness. It said he was disowning me and that any further communication must go through his lawyer. For a moment, I could not breathe. It felt as if the walls of the house shrank around me. This was the same boy I had raised with every ounce of strength I had. The same child whose scraped knees I had cleaned, whose school lunches I packed, whose nightmares I soothed. And now he was pushing me aside as if I meant nothing. The shock came so fast, so strong, that I had to steady myself on the arm of the chair to keep from falling. The message felt unreal, like it had been sent to someone else. But my name at the top reminded me that this was intentional. He meant every word. I stared at the screen, rereading it, hoping it would change or disappear or reveal a hidden explanation. It didn't. It stayed bold, sharp, and cruel. My hands trembled, not from age, but from the sudden understanding that something had been building behind my back for a long time. His message wasn't a moment of anger. It was a decision, a planned action, a betrayal he felt confident enough to send through a text, without fear of what it would do to me. The son I thought I knew would never have spoken to me like this, but this version of him, shaped by greed, influenced by his wife, and poisoned by entitlement, didn't hesitate. I felt my heart sink deeper with every second. I remembered every time he ignored my calls in recent months, every time he cut conversations short, every time he claimed he was busy, even though I could hear the indifference in his voice. His distance had grown slowly, like a shadow stretching across my life without me noticing the sun had moved. I hadn't connected the clues until this moment. I had hoped it was stress, pressure from work, or small misunderstandings. But now, reading that text, I understood it was something heavier, darker, and far more deliberate. He had been preparing to push me out. Removing me from his life wasn't an impulsive choice. It was the final step of a long plan. The room around me, once warm and familiar, suddenly felt cold. I noticed how quiet it was. No footsteps, no conversation, no hint of family. Just me and that message glowing on the screen, almost mocking me. I tried to remember the last time he hugged me with real affection. I tried to recall the last moment he thanked me for something. The memories felt distant. I saw now that his love had been thinning, strand by strand, while I was too distracted by hope to see the truth. I had kept believing he would come around, that he still cared, that he still saw me as the mother who had given him everything I had. But his text made one thing clear. In his mind, I was no longer important. Then something else struck me, fear. Not fear of losing him, but fear of what came next. When someone tells you to speak to their lawyer, it means they are taking steps to separate themselves fully, legally, financially, emotionally. And in my case, financially was the biggest concern. I had trusted him with details of my accounts. I had allowed him to help with paperwork whenever I felt overwhelmed. I had signed documents he placed in front of me because he was my son, and I believed he would never harm me. But now, after the message, I realized those signatures may not have been innocent. My fear deepened as I wondered how much control he had already taken. I remembered something else, how his tone had changed the last time we argued. He had spoken sharply, like someone who no longer saw me as a parent, but as an obstacle. His wife had been distant too, whispering behind doors and giving me cold glances, as if they were united in a plan I didn't understand. When the text came, everything clicked into place. They weren't pulling away because of life stresses. They were pushing me out because something had changed in them, something tied to money, something tied to control. But shock does not freeze me for long. I sat there, breathing deeply, letting the betrayal settle like dust after a storm. The hurt was sharp, but beneath it, something else began to rise. Clarity. I realized that if he was telling me to go through his lawyer, he believed he had power over me. He believed he had already taken what he needed. He believed the message would scare me into silence. He believed he had won. He thought I would crumble, but he had no idea what I still controlled. No idea what I still had access to. No idea that I had kept certain accounts in my own name, untouched and fully legal. His message, intended to intimidate me, instead opened my eyes. He thought he was cutting me out of my life. What he didn't know was that by sending that text, he had opened the door for me to reclaim everything: my freedom, my finances, and my dignity. And as I stared at the message one more time, I felt the shock fade, replaced by a quiet, steady resolve. When I read that message from my son, a message that cut through years of sacrifice, years of sleepless nights, years of choosing him over myself, I sat there with the phone resting on my palm like a piece of ice. It wasn't just a text. It was a declaration, a dismissal, a quiet attempt to erase everything I had ever done for him. That single line, so short, so careless, told me exactly who he had become and exactly how little he cared about what I felt. At first, I felt a sting, a sharp ache that reached the bottom of my chest. But beneath the pain, something strange began to rise. Not panic, not fear, not even anger. It was a calmness I hadn't known I was capable of. A cold, steady calm that settled over me like a heavy blanket. I leaned back in my chair and let the silence fill the room. Nothing moved. Not the curtains, not the air, not even the thoughts in my head. Just stillness. My son thought he could scare me, intimidate me, or force me into submission with a message. He thought he held the upper hand, that he controlled my life because he assumed I was weak, dependent, or too old to understand how to protect myself. He thought a lawyer could speak for him better than his own heart ever had. But he didn't know what I understood long before he ever typed those words. He didn't know what I had learned from a lifetime of seeing people change when money entered the room. He didn't know what it meant to face betrayal and rise above it. I read the words again. I disown you. Talk to my lawyer. And instead of tears, I felt a strange strength settling in. The kind of strength that appears when a door closes and you find out you were strong enough to walk away anyway. A mother never expects to be pushed out of her child's world like that. A mother never wants to see the day her child sees her as an inconvenience, an obstacle, or a burden. But here it was, the moment that tested who I was, not who he thought I was. I placed the phone down slowly, almost gently, because I knew something he didn't. I knew what accounts had my name on them. I knew what documents had been signed years ago. I knew exactly where the financial lines were drawn and who truly controlled them. And the quietness inside me turned colder, sharper. I understood instantly that he had no idea what he had just triggered. His text wasn't a threat. It was permission. Permission for me to step into the power I had held for far longer than he realized. Permission to act without guilt because he had cut the cord himself. Permission to move forward without explaining myself to anyone, especially him. The room didn't feel heavy anymore. Instead, it felt wide open, like a door had been cracked and fresh air was coming in. I lifted the phone again, staring at the message one more time, and allowed myself a small, cold smile. Not a smile of joy, not a smile of triumph. It was the smile of someone who had finally stopped begging to be respected in her own family. The smile of someone who understood that silence could be more powerful than yelling. The smile of someone who knew that sometimes the only answer to cruelty was clarity. I didn't reply, not immediately. I didn't need to. The message spoke more about him than it ever did about me. His arrogance, his confidence, his assumption that I was powerless. It all played out in those few words. He believed he had the upper hand because he thought I needed him more than he needed me. But the truth was simpler. He needed what he thought I couldn't protect. He counted on my softness, on my fear, on my willingness to forgive anything. He counted on the version of me that raised him, not the version of me that had survived everything before him. I took a slow breath, feeling the weight of years settle differently on my shoulders, not heavy, firm, grounded. The next steps were already forming in my mind, not rushed, not chaotic, just clear. He wanted his lawyer to speak to me? Fine. I had someone better to call. He wanted to cut me out? Good. I would show him the cost of that choice. He wanted to treat me like a stranger? Then he would meet the side of me. Strangers never forget. The side that protects what is hers. The side that does not bend to pressure. The side that refuses to let betrayal define her. When I finally typed my reply, it wasn't long or emotional or desperate. It was one word, a simple word that carried all the weight he didn't see coming. A word that meant I accepted his challenge, understood his motive, and was ready to act. Okay, and with that, the real story began. When I looked back at my life with my son, I realized that every step I took had been shaped by sacrifice. From the moment he was born, I carried the weight of both parents. His father had left early, disappearing from our lives without explanation, leaving me alone to raise a child who depended on me for everything. I worked long shifts, first at a small grocery store, then cleaning houses, then later working nights at a care facility. Every dollar I earned had a purpose, and most of it had his name on it. I gave up new clothes, vacations, hobbies, even friendships. My world became about creating safety for him, a future he didn't have to struggle for. His school fees, his books, sports gear, birthday parties, new shoes, every cost, big or small, came from my back and my tired hands. I never once complained. I thought that was what motherhood meant. As he grew older, I watched him change. He became ambitious, which I loved, but he also became distant, which I feared. He started spending more time with people who talked about money, status, and opportunities. He wanted to be part of something bigger, something wealthier, something more glamorous than the modest life I could offer. He never said it out loud, but I saw the shift in his eyes. He looked at me like the past, and he wanted the future. But I still supported him, even when he went to college and asked for money every month. I took loans, worked extra hours, skipped meals, and kept sending whatever he needed. When he graduated, I thought he would finally see what I had done for him. Instead, he grew colder. By the time he married, he barely called me unless he needed something. His wife treated me like a burden, like an old piece of furniture taking up space. They didn't invite me to half the family events. They came only when they wanted help with a payment, help with childcare, help with bills. Deep down, I felt something breaking, but mothers don't stop loving their children for being unkind. They just love quietly and hope things will change. When I retired and finally had a bit of savings, I made the mistake of trusting him with access to my accounts. I believed it was smart planning for old age. Someone young should help manage things. I never imagined he would use that access to slowly take control. He started making decisions without telling me, moving money, signing documents, speaking to bankers like he was the owner. I ignored the first warning signs, thinking he was just trying to help. But then the little things grew into big ones. Bank messages I didn't recognize, withdrawals I never made, financial decisions I didn't approve. When I asked questions, he brushed me off. "You're getting older, Mom," he would say. "Let me handle this." I didn't want to believe that my own son, the same boy I carried through every storm, could betray me. So I chose silence. I convinced myself he would never purposely hurt me. I didn't want my suspicions to become real. I thought that if I pretended everything was fine, then maybe everything would be fine. But the truth has a way of breaking through, even when your heart refuses to see it. His distance grew. His tone changed. He stopped visiting, and when he did come around, he behaved like a stranger. He spoke to me like someone he had already let go of. I felt the shift, the coldness, the quiet planning behind his eyes. I tried to ignore it, telling myself I was imagining things. Mothers always see danger last when it comes to their children. Then came the final blow, the text that cut deeper than any knife. I disown you. Talk to my lawyer. All those years of sacrifice flashed before my eyes, my aching back, my sleepless nights, my empty plates, my swallowed pride, my lonely holidays, my silent prayers. I had given him everything, and in return, he gave me a single message that erased decades, or at least he thought it would erase me. But that message didn't break me. It woke me. It forced me to see the truth I had been hiding from myself. It made me realize that the boy I raised no longer existed and that the man he had become was ready to throw me away the moment it suited him. And when I realized that, a strange calm filled me, not rage, not sorrow, but clarity. Because while he believed he held all the power, he forgot one thing. I was the one who carried him through life, and I had learned to survive everything: poverty, heartbreak, loneliness, betrayal. And now I would survive him too, and he would finally learn what happens when you push a mother too far. In the weeks before that message arrived, I had felt a slow and painful shift in the way my son behaved toward me, like a steady drip of cold water on the back of my neck. It wasn't one sudden, loud betrayal. It was dozens of small things, each one quiet, each one easy to excuse on its own, but together forming a storm I refused to acknowledge. Looking back, the signs were everywhere, but I pushed them aside, telling myself that children grow distant, children grow busy, children change with time. I didn't want to believe that a child I had raised, fed, sheltered, and defended could be turning into someone who viewed me as a burden instead of a mother. But the truth was settling in, like dust on old furniture, slowly, quietly, and then all at once, impossible to ignore. There were the unanswered calls first, simple things. I would ring him just to ask if he needed anything, or to share news about the house, or sometimes only to hear his voice. The phone would ring once, twice, then click to voicemail. No return call, no explanation. I told myself he was busy, stressed, tired. I wanted to protect the idea of him in my mind, so I accepted thin excuses rather than face the thicker truth. Days passed, then weeks, with him barely acknowledging me. When he did, it was rushed, distracted, like talking to me cost him something he wasn't willing to give. Then there were the financial matters. Small bills arrived that confused me, automatic deductions from accounts I didn't remember authorizing, statements with charges I had never made, notices of account changes I had not requested. At first I blamed myself. I told myself maybe I forgot clicking something online, maybe I forgot giving permission, maybe age was turning my memory soft. But the pattern continued, and each time I asked my son about any of it, he brushed my concerns away with quick explanations that had no real details. He acted like I was imagining things, like I was becoming paranoid. His tone changed from gentle reassurance to impatience so subtle I almost missed it. It wasn't what he said, it was the way he said it, the heavy sighs, the brief pauses, the tone that suggested he was managing me instead of supporting me. I felt the shift deep inside, like a fault line slowly opening. He started favoring others over me, most painfully, his wife. She became the gatekeeper between us, answering his phone, filtering communication, even commenting on my bank habits, as if I had handed her permission to examine my personal life. They both began treating me like a child who couldn't understand her own affairs. They insisted on helping me pay bills, insisted on taking over small tasks, insisted on logging into accounts just to simplify things. It felt helpful at first, until I realized I no longer had access to my own information without asking them. Each time they changed a password, adjusted a detail, or redirected a statement, I felt my independence slipping away, grain by grain. What hurt the most were the moments of coldness that came out of nowhere. During family dinners I once hosted with warmth and pride, he now sat glued to his phone, leaving me feeling like a ghost at my own table. When he visited, he carried an air of impatience, like he couldn't wait to leave. When I tried to talk to him about memories, he grew restless. When I spoke about my worries, he grew distant. His words became fewer, and his silence became sharper. I felt like I was slowly fading from his life, becoming an inconvenience rather than a mother. I still tried to tell myself it was just a phase, that people change, that love shifts, but does not break. But cracks were forming, and each one hurt more than I admitted. I realized something was deeply wrong when documents started disappearing. Small things like insurance papers, bank statements, pension information, then larger things. I searched drawers I hadn't touched in years, only to find them emptied or rearranged. Each time I tried to question him gently, he had a ready explanation, just smooth enough to swallow, yet bitter enough to linger. He was creating a world where I felt confused, unsure, dependent, and ashamed to even ask simple questions. I didn't yet know why, but I felt the foundation beneath me shifting, like I was standing on sand while he stood on solid ground. The final clue came when he began speaking about my future with a tone that frightened me. He talked about downsizing, about simplifying, about planning ahead, but his words were shaped around his benefit, not mine. He spoke as if my life was something he needed to manage, rearrange, or prepare to control. I felt myself shrinking inside those moments, realizing that my son was not thinking of me with love or care. He was seeing me as a resource to be handled, a responsibility to be minimized, or worse, an account to be accessed. By the time his text arrived, the one telling me he disowned me and to talk to his lawyer, I realized it wasn't sudden at all. It was the final crack in a wall that had been breaking for months. And in that moment, reading those words, I understood the truth fully. He had been preparing for this long before he pressed send. He thought he had taken everything from me, but he had forgotten one thing. I still had power he didn't know about. When I sat down with all the papers spread on my kitchen table, I finally understood the full extent of what my son had been planning behind my back. For months, maybe even years, he had been treating me as if I was a problem he needed to fix, rather than the mother who raised him and stood beside him through every struggle in his life. It hurt in a quiet, heavy way, the kind of pain that sits on your chest and does not go away. But as I looked deeper into the accounts, the emails, and the letters he thought I would never see, the pain slowly turned into something else, a cold understanding that this betrayal was not sudden. It had been growing like a weed in the dark, fed by his pride, his greed, and his belief that I would never fight back. The first thing I noticed was the small changes. The passwords he updated without telling me, the financial alerts he disabled on my phone, the mail he started collecting for my convenience. At the time, I did not see them as threats. I thought he was being helpful, maybe protective. I trusted him more than anyone else. He was my only son. I had spent years believing that our bond was strong, unbreakable, and respectful. But now, looking at the documents in the quiet of my kitchen, I realized he had taken my trust and turned it into an open door for himself. He had walked right through that door, taking everything he wanted and leaving me with nothing but confusion. I opened the joint account records first. That was when the truth hit me. My money, the savings I had built over decades of work, patience, discipline, and sacrifice, had been slowly moved, little by little, into an account under his control. Not all at once, not enough to alert the bank, but small amounts spread over many months. The strategy was clear. He wanted to drain me without leaving a trail. He expected me to never notice. He assumed I was too old, too gentle, too trusting to ever check. The realization was crushing. To know your own son thinks of you as weak is a wound that goes deeper than anything money can cut. I read through the messages he had sent to his lawyer, cold, short instructions, plans to move assets, notes about transferring responsibilities away from her. He even used the word incompetent, describing me as if I was a burden he had to manage. He had built a world behind my back where I was the obstacle and he was the victim. I stared at those lines for a long time, letting each word sink in. It was not just about money anymore. It was about the complete loss of respect. It was about how little he thought of the woman who had carried him, fed him, and stood by him when everyone else gave up on him. And yet, there was something else hidden in those files. Desperation. My son had taken loans, made poor investments, and tied himself to financial commitments far beyond his means. He had been drowning long before he texted me to talk to his lawyer. He had used my money to keep his life standing. When he realized it was not enough, he tried to cut ties and push me out of the picture. He wanted my money, but not my presence. My existence had become an inconvenience in the story he was trying to rewrite. I felt anger rising in me slowly, not loud or explosive, but steady and clear. He did not just betray me, he tried to erase me. He had forgotten one thing. Every account he touched still had my name first. Every document he filed still required my signature. Every asset he tried to move was legally mine. He thought he had power, but he only had access. Access I had given him out of love, trust, and the belief that a child should help his parent. But now, that same access had become the rope he used to pull himself deeper into trouble. And when he felt the rope tightening, he decided to cut me loose completely. That was the moment I knew the text he sent was not a threat. It was a confession. I sat there in the silence of my home, the truth spread in front of me like broken pieces of a life I once believed was whole. I was hurt, yes, heartbroken. But I was not helpless. The betrayal was deep, but it opened my eyes. For the first time in a long time, I saw him clearly, not as my son, not as the little boy I once protected, but as a grown man making cruel, selfish decisions. And in that moment, I understood something important. I could not save him from the choices he made, but I could save myself from the trap he built. That was the moment I decided I would not be the victim of his plan. If he wanted distance, he would get it. If he wanted me out of his life, I would walk out with everything that belonged to me. He wanted control, but he forgot who truly owned the foundation of every account, every dollar, and every piece of stability he leaned on. And before he or his lawyer could take another step, I knew exactly what I had to do. When I finally sat down with my laptop that evening, the house felt colder than usual. Maybe it was the silence after that cruel text from my own son, or maybe it was the weight of years of sacrifice crashing down on me all at once. I opened my banking portal with shaking hands, fully expecting to see restrictions, blocks, or some sign that he had already seized control. He always thought he was the smart one, the one who handled numbers better than anyone else in the family. For months, I had sensed things shifting. Passwords changed. Documents moved, paperwork disappearing from where I kept it. I had brushed it off as forgetfulness or age because that's what he wanted me to think. But that night, as the screen finally loaded, reality hit in a completely different way. Everything was still in my name. Every joint account I had once shared with him, every investment I had trusted him to manage, every savings certificate I had kept tucked away for the future, all of it was still legally mine. He had tried to hide things, yes, but he had failed to take the one step that mattered most, transferring ownership. His arrogance, his belief that I would never question him, that I would stay ignorant until he and his lawyer cornered me, it had blinded him. He thought the text he sent would break me, frighten me into contacting his lawyer like a weak, helpless old woman. But instead, his words did something else entirely. They made me alert, awake, alive with a kind of cold, clear anger I hadn't felt in years. I clicked through the accounts one by one, reading transaction histories, cross-checking numbers, scanning for anything unusual, and there it was, subtle hints of his plans, little transfers, attempts to rename accounts, notes he wrote to himself that he must have forgotten were visible on the online portal. He wasn't just pulling away emotionally or disrespecting me as his mother. He was preparing to strip me of my financial independence. He wanted control, power, and leverage, all under the disguise of managing things for me. His lawyer wasn't just for show. This was part of a bigger plan. I leaned back in my chair, letting the truth settle in. He had underestimated me. He had forgotten who raised him, who taught him to read, who worked double shifts to put food on the table, who paid for his education when he said he wanted a better life. He remembered the woman who cooked for him. He forgot the woman with a sharp mind who survived more storms than he even knew existed. And now, the same woman he disowned with a text was about to remind him exactly who she was. I opened the legal folder I kept in my drawer. It had been years since I looked through those papers. I was older now, but not foolish. I had kept every document, every deed, every piece of proof that outlined exactly what belonged to me, and what he could never touch without my consent. As I sorted through them, I felt something shift inside me. Not sorrow, not confusion, not the ache of a mother whose child had turned against her. No, it was clarity, crisp and sharp. I looked at the screen again. The numbers stared back at me. My life savings, my investments, everything I had protected for decades. And suddenly, everything clicked. I didn't need to argue. I didn't need to cry. I didn't need to beg him to reconsider his foolish, heartless text. I didn't even need to call his lawyer. I needed to act, quietly, strategically, and without hesitation. Before he could take anything, before he could freeze accounts, before he could twist the law in his favor, I would take back what was mine. Not a cent more, not a cent less. Everything I had worked for, everything he thought he could claim by cutting me out of his life. He wanted me out? Fine. I would walk out on my own terms, with every dollar he thought he could control. With each passing minute, I felt the fear drain from my body. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't lost. I wasn't the helpless target he assumed I had become. I had the legal right, the account access, and the documented proof of ownership. The power was already in my hands. He was just too blind to see it. I closed the laptop gently, almost lovingly, because now I knew his downfall would not come from rage or confrontation. It would come from the simple truth he had forgotten. A mother knows more than she ever says, and she can do more than her children ever expect. When I realized my son had not only disowned me through a text, but had also tried to push me out of my own financial life, something inside me hardened. It was a feeling I had never known so clearly. It was not anger alone. It was not sadness alone. It was a quiet and steady strength built over years of surviving disappointments, betrayals, and the slow erosion of trust from people I once believed would protect me. I understood in that moment that I could not fight this battle alone. I needed someone who could think clearly while my heart was still trying to understand how my own child could treat me this way. That was when I reached out to the one person who had always stood firm beside me, my longtime lawyer, a woman who had handled my financial paperwork for more than 20 years and who knew my accounts better than anyone alive. I explained the situation to her calmly, though inside I felt the weight of every word I spoke. She did not react with surprise. Instead, she listened with the kind of silence that comes from years of dealing with family betrayal. She had seen things like this before: children turning against parents, spouses hiding assets, siblings fighting over inheritances. She knew this terrain well, and I felt comfort simply hearing her measured breathing on the other end of the line. She told me to gather every record, every statement, and every message my son had sent recently. She instructed me to remain still, not to reply emotionally, and not to let him know I had already begun taking steps to protect myself. She reminded me that sudden fear often pushes people to make mistakes, and I needed to remain steady. Her confidence strengthened me. I stopped shaking. For the first time since I received that cruel text, I took a deep breath. She told me exactly what needed to be done: how to access the accounts properly, how to secure the funds that belonged to me, how to transfer documents into a safe place, and how to prepare for the backlash that would come once my son realized he no longer had control. She reminded me that all these years, I had been the one responsibly managing my savings, planning my future, and keeping the household stable. I was not weak. I was not helpless. I simply needed to remember who I was before guilt and motherhood made me shrink myself to protect others. She came to my house that same afternoon. The sight of her stepping inside with her organized folders and calm expression brought me more peace than any apology from my son ever could. She sat at my dining table as if she had been preparing for this moment long before I even saw the betrayal coming. Together, we reviewed every account: retirement funds, savings, emergency reserves, old investments. She explained each step slowly, making sure I understood what belonged to me and what my son had no legal right to touch. With each explanation, the fog in my mind lifted, and I saw the truth more clearly. My son had not disowned me to create distance. He had disowned me to access what he believed he deserved. His plan relied on my fear, confusion, and hesitation. He counted on me collapsing emotionally, giving him time to swoop in and take what I had spent a lifetime building. But now, with my lawyer beside me, he had no idea his plan was already falling apart. We printed copies of everything. We documented every move he had made over the past few months. We prepared statements showing where my money was, how it was protected, and what would happen if he tried to interfere again. My lawyer even connected me with a financial advisor who joined us later that day. Between the two of them, a wall was built around me, a wall my son would not be able to break with angry texts or legal threats. They reminded me that setting boundaries with my son was not cruelty, it was necessity, it was survival. By the time we finished, I felt like a different woman. My hands were steady, my mind was clear, my heart still hurt, but the pain no longer clouded my judgment. I understood now that this was not a moment of loss. This was a moment of awakening. My allies showed me something simple but powerful, that justice does not always come from confrontation. Sometimes it begins quietly, with preparation, proof, and the courage to defend what belongs to you. And while my son believed he had ended our relationship with one cold message, he had actually pushed me into discovering my own strength. With the help of the people I trusted, I was ready for whatever came next. When the transfer alerts finally reached him, the entire house of lies he had built collapsed in seconds. I knew the exact moment he realized what I had done, because the silence on my phone broke with a single buzz, then another, then 5 more. He went from fury to panic to confusion, all within minutes, sending message after message that flashed across my screen like tiny sparks from a broken wire. There was no apology, no explanation, no sign of the proud, angry son who had sent me that heartless text. All I saw now was desperation dripping from every word, and I felt none of the guilt he expected me to feel. He had pushed me into this corner. He was the one who thought he could treat me like a burden and then erase me because it suited him. Now he finally understood what it meant to lose something valuable. I didn't reply at first. I let the pressure build, because silence sometimes speaks louder than any angry words. I sat in my chair, holding my phone loosely, watching the messages come like frantic knocks on a locked door. He had always believed he could control everything: my decisions, my finances, my life. That belief had been his biggest mistake. For years, he assumed I would always bend, always soften, always give him whatever he asked for, simply because I was his mother. But now he had seen the truth. I was not the helpless woman he imagined. I had learned long ago that survival meant thinking ahead, protecting myself, and never letting anyone, family or not, hold power over my future. When I finally answered him, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't scream. I didn't argue. I simply sent one single word, the same word he had used to dismiss me, the same word he had thrown like a stone into my chest. Okay. No anger, no explanation, just that. One word that mirrored everything he had tried to do to me. It wasn't revenge. It was clarity. After that, the calls started. Long, ringing calls meant to scare me into picking up. I let every one of them echo into the room until they died out on their own. I wanted him to sit with his fear the way he had made me sit with mine. I wanted him to wonder how much I knew, what I had done, and what else I could do if pushed. His lawyer had reached out earlier, trying to intimidate me with formal messages written like threats, dressed as professionalism. But once the accounts showed zero balance, his lawyer vanished like smoke. They all understood now, legally, financially, morally, he had no leverage left. Hours later, he showed up at my doorstep. I heard the car door slam, the rushed footsteps on the porch, the urgent knock on the wood. He was breathing hard, like he had been running from the consequences he created himself. I didn't open the door. Instead, I stood close enough to hear the tremble in his voice when he said my name. All the arrogance was gone. All the entitlement evaporated. In its place was only fear. Fear of losing control, fear of facing the consequences, and maybe, buried deep, fear of losing me. I didn't open the door. I didn't owe him that comfort. Instead, I waited until he grew quiet. Then I spoke from behind the door, my voice steady, firm, and colder than any lecture I could have given. I told him the truth he had refused to see, that adulthood came with responsibility, respect, and consequences, that you cannot betray someone who raised you and expect loyalty in return, that money was not owed to him simply because he was my child, that being family was not a license to abuse, disrespect, or manipulate. He tried to speak, but I didn't let him. This time, my boundaries mattered. I told him clearly that I would not tolerate any further manipulation, financial interference, or emotional threats. I said that every step he took from this moment on would determine whether he remained a part of my life or stayed a stranger by his own choice. I reminded him he had already disowned me, his words, not mine, and that I was prepared to honor that decision if he repeated it. He fell silent, and in that silence, the power shifted completely. He finally understood that I was not a backup plan. I was not his safety net. I was not a resource he could drain whenever he needed money or support. I was a person, someone who had survived long before he was born, someone who could continue to survive even if he walked away forever. When he finally whispered something that sounded like regret, but not enough to be an apology, I stepped back from the door. I told him the one thing he didn't expect to hear. That healing was his responsibility now, not mine. That respect was the only currency that mattered going forward, and that I no longer feared losing him, because the real loss had already happened when he chose money over family. He left quietly. No more shouting, no more threats, no more entitlement, just the heavy weight of reality pressing on his shoulders. And for the first time in years, I felt calm. When the final transfer cleared and I saw the balance drop to zero on our joint accounts, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Control. Not anger, not spite, not revenge for revenge's sake. Just control. A grounded, steady calm that came from finally taking action after years of ignoring warning signs, excuses, and disrespect. My son thought his text would leave me broken, scrambling, confused, or begging him for answers. Instead, it pushed me into a strength I didn't know I still had. The moment the funds settled into the protected account my lawyer prepared for me, the entire story shifted. The power he tried to hold over me dissolved, just like that. And when my phone finally rang, not a text this time, but a full call, I knew the consequences were settling in. His name lit up the screen again and again, missed calls stacking like accusations. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Silence was the only answer he deserved for the moment. He had spent years assuming I would always be soft, always forgiving, always ready to fix what he broke. He never imagined a world where I could protect myself without asking for permission or approval. While his calls kept coming, I sat in my quiet living room with the blinds open, letting the sunlight spill across the documents my lawyer had organized. Every paper was a reminder that I had acted legally, calmly, and within my full rights. Nothing he said or claimed would change that. By the afternoon, the tone of the calls shifted, the angry texts slowed, the insults stopped. He must have checked the accounts by then and realized the truth, that everything he believed he controlled was already gone. He must have seen the empty balances, the locked access, the frozen transfers. He must have noticed that his attempt to take what he thought was his future money now had a solid wall in front of it, one he couldn't climb. I imagined him pacing back and forth, trying to figure out how I had acted before he could. He had underestimated me so deeply that he never even checked if I could move faster than him. My lawyer sent me a message confirming every step was secure. The accounts were in my name only. The funds could not be touched without my direct consent. Every financial thread he thought he had wrapped around my life was now cut clean, and when she added that his lawyer had reached out sounding confused and nervous, I felt something inside me settle even deeper. This wasn't childish revenge. This was clarity. The moment a mother finally accepted that protecting herself was not betrayal. His attempt to cut me out of his life came at the cost of losing access to mine. That was the consequence he had never expected. By evening, he finally left a voicemail. His voice sounded strained, thinner than usual. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't demanding. He wasn't pretending to be superior. He was confused, afraid, realizing that his rash decision had opened a door he couldn't close. But I still didn't call him back. The consequence was not my silence. It was his own reflection in the aftermath of his cruelty. After all the sacrifices, years of care, loans I never asked him to repay, favors I granted even when it hurt me, he ended it with a text designed to wound. So now he was left with the echo of his own words, bouncing back at him. Later, I brewed tea and sat at the table where I used to help him with homework, where I used to listen to him talk about dreams and future plans, where I used to imagine a bond that would last forever. That bond wasn't broken by a financial fight. It was broken by years of entitlement he allowed to grow into arrogance, by the belief that he could cut me out and still control the outcome. The consequence wasn't losing the money, because he never had rights to it in the first place. The true consequence was losing the version of me who stayed quiet, losing the parent he thought he could manipulate, losing the safety net he assumed would always be beneath him, no matter how he behaved. This wasn't about punishing him. It was about protecting myself from someone who had forgotten the meaning of respect. A mother's love is strong, but it is not a license to be mistreated. And as I locked away the final documents, I understood something that took me a lifetime to learn. Boundaries are not signs of weakness. They are signs of survival. And from that moment on, every decision I made would be for my peace, not his approval. The days after everything settled felt strangely quiet, like the world had paused and was waiting for me to breathe again. I sat in my living room, looking at the bank receipts, legal papers, and messages that marked the end of a long and painful chapter. It was strange to think that so much hurt, anger, and betrayal could be reduced to a few sheets of paper and a balance change in an account. But I knew the real change wasn't in the money. It was in me. For years, I had allowed myself to be pushed aside, ignored, and treated as if my worth depended on how much I could give and how quickly I could forgive. I had raised my son with love, patience, and sacrifice, thinking those things would protect our relationship forever. But family doesn't always mean loyalty. Bonds can break, even when you pour your whole life into them. When he sent that text saying he disowned me and that I should speak to his lawyer, something inside me broke, but not in the way I expected. It didn't break from weakness. It broke open like a window letting in fresh air. For the first time, I saw clearly who he had become. He had grown into someone who believed he could control me, use me, and throw me away the moment I became inconvenient. That clarity hurt, but it also freed me. It made my next decisions easy because I knew I wasn't acting out of revenge. I was acting out of survival. I wasn't punishing him. I was protecting myself. The withdrawal of the money wasn't about greed. It was about reclaiming what I had earned, what I had saved, and what I had built through hard work and sacrifice. I had supported him through college, through his first home, through his debts, through his failures. I had poured my heart into keeping him afloat, yet when he felt powerful, he turned on me like I was disposable. That thought stayed with me every night. It reminded me why I had to take control before he could ruin everything I had worked my entire life for. The money I withdrew wasn't his future. It was my security, something I had denied myself for far too long. When the dust settled and he realized what had happened, his anger came in waves, but none of it moved me. I had spent too many years thinking of his feelings, his needs, his comfort, while mine remained buried. I finally understood something that took a lifetime to learn. When someone shows you their truth, believe it the first time. My son had shown me who he had become, and pretending otherwise would have destroyed me. But the aftermath wasn't just about him. It was about rebuilding myself. I began taking walks in the morning without checking my phone every few minutes. I cooked meals for myself without feeling like I was waiting for someone to join me. I cleaned my home with slow, peaceful movements, no longer rushing to fix someone's mess or calm someone's temper. My life became my own again, quiet, simple, and steady. Little by little, I learned to enjoy my own company. I reconnected with old friends and allowed myself to speak honestly about what had happened. Their support reminded me that family is not only blood, it is anyone who treats you with respect, kindness, and truth. I also learned to forgive myself. For years, I carried guilt for the things I gave, the things I overlooked, and the boundaries I never set. But aging teaches you that guilt is useless if it keeps you stuck. I didn't need to carry pain that wasn't mine. His choices were his own, and his disrespect was not a reflection of my worth. It was a reflection of his character. With time, the anger faded. Not because I forgot, but because I refused to let bitterness steal the rest of my life. I didn't hate him. I simply accepted that he chose a path without me. And sometimes, acceptance is stronger than forgiveness. It allows you to move on without waiting for someone else to change. Now, when I look at my bank balance, I don't feel triumph. I feel safety. I feel relief. I feel proof that standing up for myself was the right decision. I protect my future now, my home, my health, my peace. And if anyone asks me what I learned from all this, I tell them something simple. Never hand your power to someone who cannot be trusted with your heart. Family can hurt you more than strangers, but courage, boundaries, and self-respect can save you more than money ever will. And as I sit here today, I know one thing with certainty. Losing my son's affection hurt deeply, but losing myself would have been far worse. I kept myself safe. I chose me. And after a lifetime of choosing everyone else first, that is the greatest victory I could ever claim.